The American macro machine Greg IdrA once said in an interview that he was not good at picking favorites. Favorite moments of his career, favorite matches, favorite maps, stuff like that. I can tell you firsthand, this is one of his fucking favorite games. This is Greg IdrA against his hero, OGS NaDa, the man that he learned to play from. Back in the mid-2000s, IdrA was a newbie guy who played UMS games like Big Game Hunters on Brood War. A casual player. Isn't it crazy to think about one of the most committed and intelligent and hard-working pro gamers in esports history just being a newbie like us that played arcade games? Big Game Hunters is like the silly thing that you play on Megaton in StarCraft 2 now. It's like 4v4 with unlimited money, basically. It's what the super casual guy goes to. Well, eventually IdrA sort of like met Artosis and became more competitive, and one of the main tools that he used to become better was a NaDa replay pack. Remember, this was back in like 06. No one was posting YouTube videos of StarCraft. No one was posting build order guide videos. No one was really even streaming. It was nearly impossible to even watch like the streams of the Star Leagues. They were just scuffed and very hard to see. To be a StarCraft fan in that era was not only way more difficult, and it was a way more close-knit hardcore scene, but you're also dealing with it being the early days of the internet. Like, you're in like 05, 06, like YouTube is not a resource. It's like Twitch TV, Justin TV doesn't exist. Live streaming isn't really a thing, and it's like the dark ages. So the way that you would learn this incredibly hard game, StarCraft, is you would have to get your hands on a replay pack, and this was incredibly rare. And the idea that these top Korean pro gamers would be releasing like personal replay packs is laughable. You would never ever see this. It was so rare, and IdrA's going to see that, oh crap, we spawned close positions. But IdrA transformed himself from being a newbie player to one of the best pro gamers in any esport of all time using a NaDa replay pack. And whenever you play your mentor and a guy that taught you how to play, it means so much more than just beating another guy who's talented on the server, or even a guy who you consider a rival, as we see a little bit of Marine SCV action pressuring here. And this is classic early StarCraft 2, where the bunker salvaged for 100%, and it was very easy to pressure Zerg in the early game. You saw a ton of barracks pressures coming from Terrans. This would come in the form of feigned pressures like that, where they would just send the one Marine while they made an add-on behind it and an SCV. Or you saw this in the forms of a committed 2 racks, where you would see 2 barracks pressure in addition to a couple more SCVs, and you would push with 3 Marines, and then you'd start to get a bunker down, and it looks like a nightmare for Zerg. But it looks like IdrA is not going to be facing that this game, as we saw a very safe 1 racks expand from NaDa. And whenever IdrA downloaded NaDa's replay pack back in the day, this taught him how to play standard, methodical macro Terran. Back in Brood War, IdrA played methodical macro Terran, just like Artosis. Artosis was the leader of the Media clan, and IdrA was the ace. The ace is the player who, if you're playing in a pro league, goes out to play like the final 7th game of a decider match. He's like the best player. And they employed this defensive macro style that they've become famous for. Well, NaDa was the guy who sort of invented that style, along with a guy named VODs, who came before him, and then Flash was sort of the guy who perfected it. But that was in like 08 and 2010. Flash wasn't around yet, and VODs came before NaDa. So in that period, NaDa was definitively like the best macro Terran, and the macro Terran that if you were trying to learn how to play the game properly, you looked to as the guiding light. So for IdrA to play NaDa here, he's not just playing the best player of his race or a really good Korean player at the time, he's playing the guy that he based his entire ethos and playstyle off of. And think about for a guy like IdrA who played a grinding methodical macro style in 2 different games, and literally, as you see, a freaking Thor ship drop here from NaDa off 1 base. This is crazy and I love it. But IdrA literally said, no, I don't think macro Zerg is the best or most strong style, but I do think if you're the better player, then that's the style that you should play because it gives you the best chance to win against people that are worse than you. As you see IdrA trying to defend this beautifully as he brings the queens back, didn't have any creep spread to work with. So the way the Thor ship drop works is the Thor decimates queens. You go boom, 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 boom with the arms and it kills the queen. That's super fast, guys. That's some Arnold Schwarzenegger type shit with all those booms. But anyway, the idea, you drop the Thor by the base, you kill the queen, you run over to the other base, kill the other queen, suddenly they have no anti-air, they can't do with the medevac, and then you just run around with impunity, killing stuff, dropping the Thor behind the mineral line, doing hot pickup. But what ended up happening was this IdrA microed perfectly, got the queens back, had the lings ready where the Thors couldn't dive the queens, and then microed the queens back where they couldn't be sniped, pushed the medevac back and stymied the first push. Lots of SCVs pulled here as a double Thor ship drop is going to be slammed into the front door of the Kraken, and IdrA, Banelings finish, they come forward, explode on the SCVs, some of them go on the Thor, but a lot of them go on the Marines, and there's half a dozen Gem Raynors left, they'll get cleaned up. The Thors are picked up, NaDa's still on 1 base, and it looks like the macro machine will defend the push against his hero, the man who not only taught him how to play StarCraft, but went on to influence the very way that IdrA thought about the game, in perpetuity. This wasn't just a replay pack that you download and go, oh, so that's how you do that all in. This was a replay pack that IdrA downloaded that became like the fucking constitution for his brain. Oh, how do you play StarCraft? You macro, you scout properly, you make workers, you don't get supply blocked. The very bread and butter ethos of how to properly play both StarCraft 1 and 2 that IdrA preached for years and looked down on people who didn't play the correct way, that very idea and like a subset of ideas and thought processes was fucking learned from NaDa. NaDa was that dude. NaDa was Flash before Flash. NaDa was the guy who played properly. If you're a fan of Artosis and you understand that like people playing properly and doing everything correctly and intelligently is the most beautiful thing about the game, then you're a fan of NaDa. As we see the Thors pushing forward here, the Speedbanes intelligently being used on the Marines, and Thors are good against Roaches, but without much support, a Thor ship drop micro trick is going to be attempted here, but IdrA will continue to pump out more Roaches. His Galil Constitution's going to finish, and IdrA narrowly defends, and I haven't touched on this much. This is Close Positions Metalopolis, an incredibly daunting and nearly unwinnable spot for Zerg that IdrA once described as worse than Steps of War, because this area right here, this high ground, Terran can just set up on this and fucking use this as a launching pad for their pushes, and Steps of War, that little area right before your natural, is a low ground, of course, whereas right here we're seeing the Terran can just poke, but IdrA's held multiple lethal 1-base pushes off at this point, so presumably he should be so far ahead where he should be able to easily crush this one. Roachling coming forward, and the idea here is to try to burst down the Thors because that's where most of the DPS comes from, but the NaDa plan here is to hot pick up on the Thors. And whenever you do that, you lose a lot of DPS, especially when you're facing someone with Defender's Advantage, and then you really don't have the DPS from other units because you've been on 1 base for so long, and NaDa calls GG, and when we see a smile from the Kraken here, we do! A smirk from IdrA as he surges through the round of 16, defeating 2 S-class god-tier Korean Terran players, one of them right there, NaDa, being a literal all-time great and god of the game, a Mount Rushmore type cat. The other one being an aggressive Protoss player who played very abusively, which, as many of you know, was the bane of IdrA's existence, were those Protoss players like that, especially the really sharp Korean ones. And the next series, going to be one of the most popular and impactful GSL series of all time, IdrA vs. Genro. VODs that were lost for 10 years that I literally went and asked the GOM TV people to upload every year, and they never did, and some random guy uploaded them. And remember, I always link the VODs in the description so you guys can watch the OG if you want. Sub for more. Fuck missing the next game.